My name is Paolo Zeppa. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm with Immersive Marketing. We're an experience marketing agency that's based in San Francisco. We work with a number of clients across industries, from the Atmels to the Zyngas, to develop programs, marketing programs that are delve both in the physical space as well as in the digital space. So I'm very happy to be here with a very exciting panel today. On our panel we have representation from SAP, from Cisco, from Microsoft, and from a digital agency that Immersive has recently begun partnering with that we're really excited about, SparkArt. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves in a bit, but I wanted to just frame the conversation first to give a sense of what we're going to be talking about. This is the third year of this conference, and I think looking back at this industry, it's really exciting in terms of how it's evolved, right? From my perspective, we're in the third phase of the evolution of this industry. The first phase was really around, when these technologies started to come out, when the event industry realized that there's this whole online engagement, people are engaging on the internet, and we really need to look at our events as beyond just physical and having an online element to it. So you start to see organizations that really experimented. You had pioneers within large organizations that were starting to create programs that were really cutting edge, whether they were the Ciscos, the Microsofts, or across industries. Then we get to the second stage, which is these organizations realize that these programs, they can't just pilot these programs anymore because they make sense and because they need to become a more ingrained part of the overall marketing strategy for these organizations. So what we start to see is a much increased, let's say, adoption of these technologies, and you start to see, I don't want to say everyone's jumping on the virtual bandwagon, but for the most part we start to see a lot of participation in the space. So the third phase, which I believe we're in today, is yes, companies are always still experimenting. We're still seeing increase in adoption of these types of technologies, but more and more we're starting to see organizations realize that if we are going to truly adopt virtual or online strategies, let's step back a second and get a sense of what this means to our organization. What should we be doing? How should we be doing it? And realizing that virtual doesn't always, what virtual meant 4 or 5 years ago is very different from what it means today. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is that this phase that we're in, and specifically three things. The conversation is going to focus on how it impacts us as marketers in terms of who we are and what our roles are within organizations, in terms of what we do, what are the types of programs and initiatives that we're working on, and in terms of how we measure success. How do we define and measure success? So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask everyone on this panel to some questions, but one of the things that we've been hearing throughout this conference is the importance of engagement with audiences around events, and so this panel is really going to be a conversation. So I really encourage everyone I'm going to keep it where, I'm going to ask questions both from the people online as well as from the audience here physically. So does that work for everyone? Great. So let's start. If each of you could, Scott and Mike and Naveen and Sharab, if you could introduce yourselves and kind of tell us a little bit about yourselves and why this audience should care.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Shanker, and since the slide was posted up, I was actually promoted. I'm Vice President of Global Events at SAP. I spent the last year and change at SAP on the client side. I've spent the majority of my years in this business on the agency side, with time at George P. Johnson, at Jack Morton, and at other agencies as well. So.
Good afternoon. My name's Mike Immervar. I've been working on Microsoft events since about 1995, and I've been full-time with the events team in the central marketing group for about 8 years now, the last 2 of which I've been focused solely on digital events. And that's about that.
Good afternoon. My name is Saurabh Kachari. I'm the Senior Manager for virtual events at Cisco, and I've been doing webcasting and virtual events for about 12 and a half years now.
Hi, my name is Naveen Jain. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Spark Art Group, Inc. We're a digital agency, and we do everything from creative all the way through to execution and strategy for our clients. Our clients range from Bon Jovi to Janet Jackson to The Killers.
Very cool. And on the side, you also have 2 social gaming.
Yes, I also own 2 social gaming startups. I own a logistics startup in Atlanta, so I'm a serial entrepreneur.
Before we get started, I kind of want to get a sense of the makeup of the audience here in the room. So let me get a sense of how many of you are from the trade show or association space. So maybe 15, 20. Okay. Oh yes, and if you could, online, if you could tweet also, that would be great, and we can share. What about in terms of the, from corporations side? Okay, it's a handful. And on the technology side, in terms of technology solutions providers? Okay, all right. Well, so let's get started here then. The first, as I mentioned, the first area that we're going to look at is in terms of how this space is, the phase that we're in is impacting us as marketers. So the first question I would have, and I'll throw it at you, Scott, in terms of the concept of quote-unquote a virtual event. What does that mean to you? Is it too limiting?
In some ways, I think it's too specific. A virtual event is like saying a video or a keynote or a slide. To me, it describes the tactic, not necessarily the objective, the audience, the purpose. And we tend to talk about online strategies rather than just virtual events. Now, we'll have virtual events. We do dozens, hundreds of them. We have several. We have one coming up next week. We have virtual events in connection with our physical events. But I think it's too specific. I think in and of itself, it is just the tactic that you're describing and not the broader objective that you're really trying to reach. And at the end of the day, tactics without objectives a walk down a dark alley.
So you would refer to it more as what, marketing strategies or online strategies?
Well, yeah, online strategies. I think you need an online strategy to align with your purpose. If your purpose is training, you would have an online strategy for this is my audience, this is how I'm going to, this is what I want them to accomplish, this is the objectives I have, therefore I'm going to reach them online through these tactics. It may be social, it may be a virtual event, it may be a media repository or a content management system or something of that sort. Online is now device-centric as well as screen-centric, and that takes the concept even further from the physical event itself. And I think at the end of the day, that's where this concept of virtual events started as a descriptor. You had a physical event, you had something different than that was online, it was a virtual event. Now with so many different ways to engage with that physical event experience or replace that physical event experience, you end up with online strategies.
Yeah, I could never stand that term, virtual event, because it made it sound like it wasn't actually happening. It's not an event; it's virtual, right? So I think in terminology, certainly within the digital event marketing network at Microsoft, we tend to refer to them as, we think of it as an online event or an in-person event. Because it really is, I think the piece that makes it very, very distinctive from just a web page or just some material putting out is there is this kind of temporal moment to it. And ideally, that's the piece that can really drive sort of conversation and interaction. Everybody has to be there at one time. You have to sort of experience something. And you can duplicate that online, and that moment drives return visits and that sort of thing. But I think it really is, to me, I hear that, I translate online event, and I think about that kind of temporal moment of it.
Okay. So Sharab, when you think of Cisco and you think of Cisco's GSX community, 20,000 users, you think of Cisco Live community, 60,000 users, and then you broaden it to existing, persisting communities, whether it's NetPro community and talking hundreds of thousands. What does virtual event mean to Cisco?
I personally don't have an issue with virtual events because it's actually part of my title. So if you take that away from me, I'm going to become very vague all of a sudden. But I think it's extremely convenient. I think the term has caught on because it's extremely convenient to call something a virtual event. And the most convenient form of a virtual event is an event that you've taken virtually somehow. However, for the GSXs, for the Cisco Lives, and even for our standalone webcasts that can have 5,000-10,000 people, or a really well-coordinated WebEx session, as Scott was mentioning to us earlier. The term virtual event encompasses all of those things, but a virtual event strategy is incomplete. You cannot strategize and plan to deliver virtual events in a start-stop process. I don't think that's the way to go.
And so when you think of specifically one of the things that is that I've seen is, similar to Salesforce coming out with Chatter, and you have, Cisco that's coming out with Quad, which is these, essentially what they are collaboration platforms, right? So they're recognizing that communities exist in a pervasive fashion and that people are used to, participating in these communities in environments that look like the ones that they participate in on Facebook. So you have Cisco, who's got this suite of collaboration products that, in a certain sense, could start to creep into the event space and has. How does that fit into what virtual event means for you who works at Cisco with this new offering?
Yeah, no, it's interesting to add your own platform into the mix, and to add a platform that is essentially a social collaboration platform built predominantly for on-demand usage for large communities. It will serve the needs of certain types of events or series of events or communities that you're enabling. And other virtual events that are very temporal, that have a very specific approach and may even dictate a very specific UI, that is probably not going to be best enabled on a social collaboration platform. But we are piloting virtual events on Quad, and we're seeing a lot of attention within the company to do that. It helps that it's a time when people don't have a lot of budget, so it's great to use your own product. But we're going to see how that works out.
Okay. So Naveen, last night we had a conversation about a quote-unquote event that you had, a virtual event, and in terms of the goals that you had, 1 million, and how it proliferated. Give us a sense of what an event looks like in your space.
So a virtual event to us is really about using a series of tools to drive an amplification for anything physical that we happen to be doing. So the conversation that we had last night was around a project that we did for one of our clients, the rock band Bon Jovi. We wanted to stream one of their live shows. So their show is an event just like anyone else's event. But the only reason we would want to stream the show is because it's all about driving an amplification to what's actually happening in the physical space at any given arena or stadium where the band happens to be playing. So what we did is we partnered with one of our partners, a company called Ustream. And the reason we decided to deploy Ustream was because Ustream has a really powerful Facebook application that drives a very significant amount of virality. So what we saw is we launched the stream with very little marketing. We did very little upfront marketing to the fan base. We just basically made a post on the band's Facebook page, launched the Ustream application, and what we saw is fans started talking about the event within the stream. But the value to Facebook is that the second you post something about something that you like or you're watching or a photo you're looking at, whatever it is, it shows up on your news feed. So your entire social graph, potentially, depending on your standing with your social graph, Facebook has gotten increasingly intelligent over time, your social graph has the potential to see your post and therefore potentially participate in the event. So for us, in this case, the quote-unquote virtual event was an amplification strategy. So what we saw was we had 40,000 consumers with paid tickets at our event in the arena or in the stadium where the band was playing the show. We started off when we launched the virtual event with something in the neighborhood of a couple thousand unique, or concurrent rather, consumers watching the event via the live stream. 1 hour into the event, we had over 130,000 concurrent consumers watching the event. And when you looked at the statistics overall, we had an average view time of over 14, 15 minutes plus well over 1.1 million total unique consumers who actually participated in the event. And the only reason that happened, as I said, is because we were taking advantage of the tools that were available to us. We didn't just do a virtual event for virtual event's sake. We did it with a specific purpose and goal in mind.
Exactly. Paul, I actually wanted to add something on that last point. With GSX, as you manage, I mean, it's an internal event, so there's a great amount of control over the audience and the expectation because they all work for you, right? As opposed to your client base, it can be a very different landscape. You have to do what works for the specific opportunity. With GSX this year, we had, for all practical purposes, a very large virtual event, but apart from all the virtual participation, we added physical locations where people grouped to partake in the virtual and their own community activities. So it was almost the reverse hybrid. It's a virtual event where we've added physical locations to facilitate the entire experience. And it works. Will it work for everybody? No.
Right.
But you have to do what works.
Well, but I think all of this it needs to be in context to understanding the audience, understanding the objective, understanding the message and the competitive environment. If you have those things as the foundation, then whatever virtual event tactic, strategy, online, whatever you call the rest of it, you can then align it to those things. Without those things, it's tactics looking for loose solutions.
Well, and I think it's kind of ridiculous to think that you're going to have like one solution that's going to work for all your audiences. I mean, even as technology companies or media companies, we're not going to, whether it's an internal audience, whether it's an external audience, whether they're developers, whether they're IT decision makers, you're going to have a different, you're going to need a different mode to interact with those folks. And so to think that one thing is going to, one tactic, if we assume that that's a particular virtual event vehicle, one tactic is going to work for everybody is.
Well, and even a step further, we were talking about this in the hallway a little bit earlier. Each of our brands have very different personalities.
Yep.
And your brand personality needs to come out as well. So the platform that SAP might select for reaching a non-physical audience might be a different experience than what Microsoft or Cisco or someone else might choose. The platform itself becomes an extension of the brand. So when we put the online strategy together for Sapphire Now last year in 2010, we very intentionally got away from these animated cartoon three-dimensional virtual environments because that wasn't our brand. A brand that might be more fun. SAP's brand is not a bad brand, but it's not a consumer brand. It's a business-to-business brand. Might need or might want to create an online experience where that brand is brought to life in different ways, and that needs to go into the discussion as well.
The other challenge you have is technology is changing so quickly, and there's this sort of ongoing optimization towards driving ever higher levels of engagement and also creating ever more granular and quote-unquote accurate metrics, right? So choosing a one-size-fits-all solution is potentially very limiting because it potentially makes you closed-minded to seeing what all the other opportunities are, what all the other tools are that are out there at your disposal that are the current state of the art that might deliver a better result based upon what the objective you're trying to achieve. So that's something that we take into account every single time we do a project. The next event we do, we may have a different partner. We may choose to go a different direction. We may not want to do it with Facebook. We may want to do it with a different a platform because the objective may be different. The state of the art is likely going to be different. We all know that. So based on that, we are forced to keep a very open mind about what tools we end up deploying.
Yeah, I think, being a technology company, it's definitely a trick when you have essentially part of your product suite, comes close to duplicating what the various platforms do. I mean, so that for us, really becomes, it's not enough for us to just look at a particular virtual event platform. We have to really dig in. We have to know what kind of technology it runs on. Then we have, efforts, within the company. Certainly, we've produced a couple of virtual launches on SharePoint. Yeah. So we'll always have that piece kind of competing with it.
Can I ask a question to the audience? I mean, we talked about associations versus company side versus. How many folks here are in industries that are technology-based industries? Here and online, sorry. And how many are in like a consumer product or non-technology industry? And I think and to the point, I think there's a very different set of expectations that your audiences are going to expect our audiences expect a cutting-edge experience and very likely one that matches our product sets. And yet a consumer group or an association group or professional services group might not be looking for that in the experience that they're going to have.
But we are seeing similarities in terms of whether you're in the B2B space and you've looked at traditional events and now you're exploring coming in, whether it's creating hybrid or virtual events, and you start to think of, okay, what does that provide us in terms of an opportunity to extend the reach, right? Because now when you think about it, how do I define success for a developer conference that has a robust virtual aspect to it that extends the reach? Well, it's no longer about, we went from 5,000 to 10,000 to 15,000. In reality, your organization probably has hundreds of thousands of developers, and you are now using a medium that has access to that. You can't expect to achieve the same things. So when you look at it in the consumer space, we were with Zinger earlier this year or late last year, and it's interesting to see, here's a consumer company, obviously. I mean, we were talking to one game division, they have like 30 million customers. And when you start to talk to them about, okay, what does success look like in terms of engaging these audiences with a program that's both physical but also virtual, the response was like, you got to talk to me about how you're moving millions of people. And so these organizations are wired to think that way. They're wired to define success that way. And I think as even B2B companies get into the space where they're dealing with platforms that provide that extended reach, there's a lot of learnings from those consumer organizations. I want to stop and see from the audience if there are any, we're exploring sort of like what are virtual events, what are they becoming, what are you seeing? Do you have any questions for the panel? Let's start with online.
There's a couple actually, so we'll start with, do you use different technologies or platforms for internal events, different platforms for internal versus external, and what platforms are you using?
Yes, we do, but not because it's internal versus external.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, so again, we do it because the audience is somewhat different. Now, I'll put an asterisk next to that. One of the most successful online events that I've had was 5,000 attendees with an average viewing time of 60 minutes. Now, what it happened to be was a briefing before a physical event for the employees of the company to understand the rules of how to engage with our physical event. It was a WebEx that we did, WebEx, a Cisco product, that I hosted and put on, and as far as I'm concerned, that is a virtual event. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, yes, I used the internal tool that existed within the company because it was available to us and cheap.
Yeah,
inexpensive.
I think in our case, it's that there's definitely a push to use our collaboration technologies for internal events, but I think our internal technical training events are probably the most complex in terms of, we'll have like 400 breakout sessions over the course of 5 days, and it's a lot of content. But those, typically the platforms that are developed to be used within, the confines of CorpNet, essentially, they're all built on our technology, and they tend to be pretty bare bones compared to the same sort of thing we would use for a product launch. So I think honestly, there's just, we essentially, our practice has been, we pretty much strip the site marketing off those internal events. Now, we do all kinds of marketing about the event itself outside of that particular channel, but that site itself, we tend to make those as just, as clean as possible so people can just move through the content very, very quickly. But that's really the only differentiator.
What about with Cisco?
I think most of the platform providers that you've seen here are working with Cisco in one way or another. And that's because we are looking at various ways to reach various audiences. And I don't think we differentiate on internal, external at all. And that's a pretty extreme statement, right? But I think even if you look at just external, there's a myriad of different audiences that you can define within that. Is it your prospective leads? Is it a user conference? Very different dynamic. If they're existing Cisco customers, the way you want to reach out to them, the way you want to interact with them, what they're going to be interested in, very different from somebody who's engaging with you for the first time. It's a very different dynamic, and internally it's very different as well. Internally, we have very different applications and strategies for executive engagement virtually, right? As opposed to training, as your training events are. You could do a training event, you could do just about anything. And then also specific geographies. If you're doing an event internally in a certain geography. And this is, I think, to Scott's point, why would one solution work? Does the audience have any other example where they can engage with a wide variety of people using one medium? Except for maybe email.
We had some questions here from the floor.
I'm interested to know how important post-show activation and community and content distribution is, and how you each look at that.
Post-event activation is extremely important for us because from our perspective, we're very consumer-facing at the end of the day for the majority of the brands that we represent. So we do everything we can to drive loyalty, drive retention, and create a meaningful relationship with that consumer. But again, that's because we're very consumer-focused. I think the answer becomes a little bit different depending on the target market or the target objective that you have. So we employ tactics like, I'll work with a company like a Ticketmaster, in my case, to get all of the buyers for any one of our events, and so I can reach out to them after the show and just say thank you, something as simple as that, and maybe provide them an additional piece of content to reward them for attending one of our events. Or we might run a contest or some other kind of program using one of the social networks, whether Facebook or MySpace or Tagged, whatever it is. So we do a lot of different things in that regard, but again, we're very consumer focused.
We're trying not to look at events specifically as a start-stop experience, because that start-stop experience is in the mind most dearly to the event manager. Because all of you who manage events...
Or the business owner.
Yes.
Or the business owner, right?
Yeah.
You know when it's over. Trust me. All of you really recognize when it's over, and there's generally a great celebration that it's over. But the truth is, for the customer, for the employee, for any of the stakeholders or any of the attendees, there was an experience with the idea, the concept, the message before you even promoted your event. They're experiencing and engaging with you all the time, continuously. The event is one stop with hundreds of points of touch if you're doing an immersive virtual environment, and then the event's over and you need to continue that experience. And everyone's in different points in their journey. So not to be unfair to the question, but to think that you would not engage an audience after the event is to think like once somebody buys from you, you don't want them to buy from you again. Of course you do.
Yeah, I would... I think as a company, we get a little schizophrenic about this, and I think it's because from a corporate business group perspective, we want as many eyeballs on our content as possible. We want to enable anybody who wants to develop on that platform. We want to make their lives better. From a sales perspective out in the field, I want qualified leads out of every single one of those virtual events. I want to know who was in there for 5 minutes and who actually watched for an hour, because that's the person I want to talk to. And those can be a little at odds with each other. And the reality is that if you put any kind of registration piece in front of a webcast, you automatically lose people. Okay. If you have to download any software onto your machine, you automatically lose people. And so, those things kind of, they are a little bit at odds with each other, and we get, we go kind of backwards and forwards all like, I can't believe you guys are giving this stuff away from a field perspective. Like, why wouldn't you want to know who's in that event? And whereas back in Redmond, we're like, wow, we got 300,000 eyeballs in that event. Yeah. Success.
So give a little bit of context to that, because that was a very interesting strategy that Microsoft has with regards to Tech Ed Online, which is very much more around, we are going to make sure, at least my interpretation of it, that everything that we produce at an event, we're going to capture and we're going to make it massively available. And we're not going to necessarily create an event around it. We're going to let the organization, or better yet, the user, self-organize around it, but it's really focused on content, right?
Correct. Yeah. I think that, and most recently, we had sort of an interesting experiment. We've had an event that it's been going a number of years now, PDC, our Professional Developers Conference. And it's actually, you know, it's got a pretty good brand name for itself among that community. We typically do it, it's between a year and 18-month cycle. Around 5,000, 7,000 people show up at that. For a variety of reasons this year, they ended up doing that, you know, on site instead, within the Microsoft campus. The biggest room I think we can get 750 or 800 people in. And so we had this kind of crazy demand for this thing. We pushed that all into an extremely complex online experience, and we kind of promoted it worldwide. I think we had 300,000 viewers within 2 weeks, maybe. A lot of that, we had 4 or 5 concurrent sessions. Each one of those is translated into 4 languages, real time. Each one of those had sort of closed captioning running as well. Huge expense. We have no idea who looked at that. I mean, we know a lot of developers watched it. We know the people who came in and gave us feedback. We know the people who asked questions, but we can't attach a single name to it. But as far as, the developer platform group is, success, right? Yeah. But again, that's a very different, if I'm somebody in the field and my, I want, lead generation, right? I want to know who those people are so I can close sales. It's a different perspective.
But I want to add a little bit, because we talked about this a little bit in the past. Metaphors are incredibly powerful in what we do every day in our lives, and virtual events carry with it the metaphor of an event. And events are physical things that have times attached to them. They start, they run a period of time, they end. They're actually one of the most unforgiving industries on the planet, because you cannot delay an event from taking place. You know what, we're not ready yet. Yeah. We're going to push it off by a day, which you can do with a movie, you can do that with stage theater, you can do that with just about anything else in the world. And you don't get a second chance to make a first impression with a physical event. So as an industry, we've taken the event metaphor and brought it to this online, rich media, dialogue-based, community-driven opportunity. And I think we're constraining ourselves too much by continuing to carry that metaphor. So, the question of what do you do after a virtual event is carrying that metaphor that it ends. And what typically will end is the delivery of the content. This panel will end at some period. I hope you guys are hoping probably sooner than later. But that's just the end of when the content is being created. That's not the end of the online strategy. So we took that metaphor change very much to heart in Sapphire Now this last year, and we went into a broadcast metaphor. Not a virtual event or hybrid. We went to a complete broadcast metaphor. And we said, what does that mean to our online strategy? In broadcast, if you're ABC, if you're NBC, if you're PBS, you got 24/7 on a page to keep active and running and interesting. And yes, you may have 5 people at a time, 10 people at a time, 1,000 people. And certainly there is a magic moment that happens as the content's being created. More people will tune in at that point. But we worked with our platform provider at the time, Vcopius, and tore the entire metaphor apart. It's not a virtual environment, it's now it's now a broadcast model. And we were able to capture and stream in real time over 600 HD sessions, but then kept that site live until we took it down to get started with the new show. And we kept that live for months and months and months, and the debate, it's screaming matches between the marketing guys who wanted to capture every single person who came, no matter how long they saw it, and the other side of the organization who was like, just let's give all the content away. Why aren't we posting all of the sessions on YouTube? Why aren't we getting it out to as many people as possible? So we ended up with a very, very consciously created syndication plan that says this is the content that came out of the event. How are we going to syndicate that through our online channels? We took the top 25, put them on YouTube. We took the top 50 and put them into our executive briefing centers. We took all 400 sessions from both Frankfurt and Orlando and kept them online for, I guess, 8 months or so. But I would really encourage you to break the metaphor of events, physical events, in the online virtual event environment. Because it's all metaphors will constrain your ability to think beyond, and this physical event metaphor is an incredibly unique one that's not realized in most of the rest of the world.
So I'm going to move on to the next topic, if you will, which is what I'm hearing is that this can be pretty disruptive, right? In terms of, now you take something that was a lot more defined, and you have organizations that build competencies to be able to deliver that kind of program, Now you're starting to say, well, the boundaries aren't so defined, and this thing is far more reaching into both within your organization as well as outside. Because when you start talking about communities, right, organizations like Microsoft, SAP, Cisco, yes, you have internal communities, but more importantly, when you think about acquisition, you're also looking to influence outside communities. So let's talk about what kind of stress does this create organizationally in terms of the companies, the departments, the organizations that you work in, and what do you see working? What do you see that's not or that needs to change?
Well, I think that in my mind, one of the promises of virtual events is the fact that because it is in this sort of digital format, you can stitch it within your other digital marketing activities to really, as Scott mentioned, to have a sort of online marketing plan, right? It becomes part of that cycle. In a way that frankly, it wasn't when you had a physical event, you kind of everything stopped here, you went to a physical event, then you got back, right? And the ability to stitch that through there's a lot of promise there. The reality, I think, for us is that we also have a lot of well-developed channels which we've been communicating with, developers or different, CIO communities, whatever, over the years. Channel 9, which we use to reach the developer community, it's very, very mature. A lot of people are, tuned into that. A lot of people are getting the RSS feeds from that. And so, in a sense, then you have an online event. It disrupts that piece, right? And so, how those things balance together is, honestly, something I think we're still kind of group by group and audience by audience. We're still balancing it out.
And I'm gonna pick. I know that there's someone else who recently joined Microsoft in the audience. Donna, give us your perspective. You're new to Microsoft, not new to large organizations, but what does that look like?
Well, I think I have to agree with what Mike said. We are at a point where part of my team is charged with Tech Ed North America, and we are at a point where we're looking at, how do we take Tech Ed North America as kind of a community, because it's a great loyal community. How do we do that and then integrate or, work in conjunction with all of these other communities that are out there, or don't we? Or how do we take our information and put it on those so that at the end of the day, what we want to do from an audience standpoint, absolutely, is make sure we're providing relevant content and what the audience wants. And as Mike mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, we have the IT pro and developer audience doesn't want to be marketed to. They want relevant content. They want authenticity, basically. So we have that struggle. But at the end of the day, it's what we're trying to look at is what's the best way for the customer, for the audience to get what they want, and for us also to kind of give them the information that we would like them to have. So that's kind of our struggle. And Mike, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but...
No, let's leave it there for now.
So I want to get the perspective of someone more from the association space. We do a lot of work with associations, and just last week we were with American Wind Energy Association working with the events group and talking about how you can build community and how technology enables the events, but also recognizing that there's this whole membership department and they own the relationships more on a year-long basis. And when you think of, let me get some perspective from some of you in the audience there as to, is that a complexity that you're seeing now that you're either starting to or have invested in some of these digital technologies? Anyone? Oh. Great.
Hi, I'm with the Computing Technology Industry Association, CompTIA, and we're in that kind of situation where we are a nonprofit. We do webinars, we have some smaller virtual events, but we haven't done anything large scale yet. But we are the trade association for the IT industry, so we feel like when we put something out there that's technology related, we do have to kind of go to the far end as far as it being cutting edge, because that's what our membership expects. And we also serve two very different audiences. We are the trade association that puts out certifications for the IT industry like A+, Network+, Security+. So we have our IT certified professionals who aren't necessarily members, but that's a very large audience. And then we have our actual association members, which are companies like Cisco, Microsoft, and companies like that, and also smaller IT solution providers. So it's very hard to kind of wrap your head around it because it is such different audiences and trying to appeal to both audiences and engage them on a year-round basis.
Right.
So that's, we're putting together our strategy now, and that's why I'm here.
Paul, I have to ask a follow-up if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Specifically, that's an excellent, case scenario right there. So you're already engaging audiences digitally with content, right? And you're already seeing segments of audiences that work with certain pieces of content and some that don't. If you get it all right, please tell us how to do it. Why are you seeing the need to go into a more virtual event type structure? What are you trying to?
I think
who's
it's
asking
still,
you to do it?
It's more just expanding the reach. Like if you say the name CompTIA, most people don't know who we are, but then especially even in the IT realm, if we say, oh, we're the ones that do A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, then they're like, oh, now we know who you are. So it's kind of an awareness about the association, and then also just from an education perspective, just to, for membership recruitment, to get the word out there. Because we have a really big audience on the certified side. Our membership is growing still. There's still lots of room for us to grow in that area. So it's education also for the IT industry. So it's kind of, the broader reach. We do our annual, we have an annual meeting in April, and then our larger IT industry show that's in August. But it's just kind of to reach beyond those audiences and get a bigger.
One of the metaphors I hear frequently internally into Microsoft, and this I think applies, I've heard it applied a lot to social media and to digital events to a certain degree, and that is, is it racing stripes or spoilers? So if you have a race car, a spoiler will actually make your car perform better, right? And it looks cool. Racing stripes don't make your car perform better, but no one will take you seriously if you don't have them, right? It's not, somehow it's not a racing car. And so, there is this interesting piece, particularly being, in the technology industry, where it's like now if you don't have an event and if you don't have that content online, people are like, they don't get it, right? So it's an interesting, there is this, and I think that, unfortunately, that kind of drives some of the bright, shiny object piece where like, oh, we've got to have that. We've got to have and then people are jumping to tactics,
Yep.
right? And execution instead of, the question, which is what are you trying to accomplish? Yeah. Don't be afraid.
I know the technology innovations, and technology is innovative, and it's very much can be disruptive, and we've seen that a lot. But there are predictable, non-technological disruptions that are coming. Mm-hmm. Social media at its nicest is social, at its worst is anarchistic media. What we've seen with technology, the ability for somebody to be a reporter. We now have news that has defaulted to the public to report what's happening. The technology that is the bright shiny object and the Wizard of Oz technology for putting on virtual events is now becoming more and more both commonplace and embedded into various things, whether it's WebEx and the two companies to my left are both looking at ways to more democratize the ability to have virtual events or reach out. But if you look just a little bit past that, how long before communities themselves decide to cover the events without the company's involvement? How long before a group of people, either for-profit or not-for-profit, decide to cover CES through their own channel by putting people in every session and reporting on it, blogging it, tweeting it, streaming video, streaming audio, without the permission of the event owner?
And that's actually something that we're seeing is actually coming from
CES, right? So the
CES is a
trusted
classic
source,
example.
right? So this is, events, one of these great last stances because they're physical, because the barrier to entry is quite high, because there's a large cost involved, and you can't put, though I guess Macworld still manages to put on Macworld without Apple's involvement, it's pretty hard to do that. This technology could get to the point where your community pushes you out of the mix altogether. And in fact, their voices will be more relevant. It may be more authentic. It's certainly more authentic. It may be more relevant. It may be more trusted. If you know that's coming, if we think that's a realistic, disruptive social pattern that we might see, and I personally believe it is, because more and more people now have the tools in a single bag to cover an event in HD where in the past you couldn't do that. Then what are we doing right now as communications, marketing, event experts to prepare for that? We actually welcomed it into Sapphire Now by bringing social reporters into the program. We identified certain people out of the community, mentors, bloggers, folks of that sort, who are already going to cover the event themselves. We simply aggregated their content onto our systems as well as theirs, and we encourage people to say, if you can't make the physical event, we know that you don't necessarily care about everything, because even the folks that make a physical event don't care about everything. We're going to give you an expert to follow. You follow this person's channel, they will talk to you about this thing, sustainability, or ERP, or in-memory computing, or whatever it is. So we're starting to endorse that. I would say if you can take a small amount of your day or your week or your month to envision what these disruptive elements are going to be and start to plan for those, that'll get you very much ahead of where the world's going.
So I'm going to disrupt Scott for a bit. And Naveen, we have a few more minutes left, and one of the things that I'm hearing is throughout this conference is the importance of engagement, right? So when you think of everything that we've talked about in terms of what virtual events or online strategies are becoming and impact it's having on you and your organizations, and help me understand, like, how do you measure engagement?
So the typical way most people measure engagement is very basic, time on site or time spent viewing whatever the content is. We've sort of modified our thought process with respect to engagement based upon what we really hope our customer does. So for example, in the social gaming universe, engagement is not only measured by the amount of time someone spends on the game, but also the K factor, the number of other consumers they bring in to play the game. And then we don't just measure the fact that, Johnny invited Susie to come play the game. We also measure, okay, did Susie actually become an active player of the game? Did she actually reach level 10? That is a conversion in our point. That is engagement in our definition, in our methodology, because unless that actually occurs, it's really not that valuable to us. Just because someone invested time into something doesn't mean they're really, an active participant or really going to drive meaningful value from our organization's perspective. So we're always very careful to sort of redefine the metrics that we're looking for based upon the available technology at that moment in time, and then also try to identify and push ourselves to get the most possible value, the most blood from the stone that we possibly can with respect to our consumer base.
Anyone else?
Well, I mean, what better catalyst for audience acquisition than the audience itself, right? If the audience is going to grow another audience for you, you should listen. In fact, I did have a quick question, just show of hands. How many of you have engaged your potential virtual audience to ask them what they want from your virtual event? One?
Yeah,
one half?
Two, yeah, three over here.
One, three, four people. That's a place to start.
It's interesting. I realized looking at some data from one of the groups within Microsoft that runs a large event, and they had all this feedback about what people thought of their website and what they thought of the virtual event. And I was like, well, where did you get this data from? It's like, well, we asked the people who attended the in-person event. I'm like, okay, they're drivers for each other, right? I mean, that's the beauty of the hybrid situation is that they essentially both promote each other. But I was like, well, did you try to capture anybody online? And they're like, well, yeah, it's like, well, So it's but it's interesting. They took almost all their website design feedback from people who were at the event, not people who were strictly online.
I think, just to add a little, I think you measure if engagement's your objective, you measure it differently than you measure it if it's not necessarily your objective. Mm-hmm. In some of our events, they're sales events, and the objective is not the engagement, it's how quickly can I get them to talk to somebody, become a lead, become vetted, become a pipeline, et cetera. If it's a technology event, we have a tech ed as well. How quickly have they mastered that skill, maybe brought somebody else, taken that skill back to the office to better the implementation that they have in place already. So to me, you can measure the diagnostics of anything. You can then measure the results of it, but if you have an ROI component to get to as well, you should be measuring up to that level.
So I know we're running out of time, and this essentially is I would encourage everyone here to continue the conversation if this is something that's relevant to you directly with the panelists. I've had the opportunity to spend time with them and go deep on these subjects, and I guarantee you that there's a lot more insight and a lot more recommendations behind that. So with that, I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us, and particularly the audience here as well as online. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.